Welcome to the Oilers TV live stream as we bring you inside the Oilers Hall of Fame room at Rogers Place for an announcement from the Oilers Entertainment Group. I'm Tony Braun. Welcome to EdmontonOilers.com as we'll have full coverage today, including some exclusive content following this morning's press conference. Stay tuned.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Rogers Place here in the heart of Ice District. My name's Tim Shipton, Senior Vice President with Oilers Entertainment Group, and I will be your MC today. It's certainly been an exciting few weeks for the organization, certainly an exciting day today, and want to welcome Oilers fans from across oil country who are tuning in. It's been a very busy time, of course, since May 7th when we introduced Ken Holland as our President of Hockey Operations and GM, and got some news to announce today. So we're going to hear from our speakers, followed by some questions, and then time for one-on-ones. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Ken.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming out today. I'm here today to introduce the next head coach of the Edmonton Oilers, Dave Tippett. I started the search 3 weeks ago, today actually, when I was named the general manager of the Edmonton Oilers. The first thing that I did was reach out to Ken Hitchcock. You're all familiar with Ken, obviously. He's been a coach in the National Hockey League a long, long time. And I asked Ken to assist me in going through the process in naming the next head coach of the Edmonton Oilers. So I want to thank Ken for being involved and helping me out in this process. Basically, I put together a list of about 15 to 17 candidates. There was 3 or 4 that had never coached before. Most of them had history, experience of being an NHL head coach. And then over the last 3 weeks, basically Ken and I worked the phones a lot. We talked a lot of, I talked to a lot of managers. I know Ken talked to a lot of coaches, assistant coaches, people that were on Dave's staff and people around the league in trying to work our way through the list. Dave was always the leading candidate in my mind going through the process, but I wanted to make sure that as I worked away towards making a decision that I felt comfortable that that we were hiring the best man possible, and I feel very good about that today. Along the way, Dave and I, after I left here on the Tuesday, I flew to San Diego to go watch Bakersfield play. Dave and I met for 4 or 5 hours in San Diego, and then last week we met again for 4 or 5 hours in Western Canada. And I think as I've gone, I talked to some players that had played for Dave in the past in Houston and also in the National Hockey League, and I think that the reasons why we're here today, I'm big on experience. Dave has coached in the National Hockey League for over 1,000 games behind the bench. I believe when you're in the National Hockey League, there's always some choppy waters, and certainly having somebody behind the bench that's been through those before, it's a positive. Dave's teams play with structure. He holds his players accountable, and he's a good communicator. And I think that those are real important ingredients in being a head coach in the National Hockey League today. So I look forward in working with Dave to build the Oilers into an elite team, and it's my great pleasure to announce Dave as the 16th head coach in Edmonton Oilers history.
Thank you very much, Ken. An honor for me to be here today. Took a while to track Ken down. He's a busy guy these days. It's all over the place. But first of all, I want to thank Daryl Cates for the opportunity with the Oilers here. Bob Nicholson, obviously Ken Holland. Just an exciting time. I've been in pro hockey a long time as a player and as a coach. I haven't had the good fortune of coaching in Canada or playing in Canada, and that was very intriguing to me. It was funny last night talking to my mom, who lives out on Vancouver Island. I don't think I've ever heard her so enthused about a job that I've taken in my life as coming back to coach in Canada. So a real exciting time for me and my family. I come to a team here that obviously has good pieces, lots of upside, and everybody talks about McDavid and Draisaitl. There's more pieces here than McDavid and Draisaitl. There's good players here to build on, and I think there's lots of upside with this organization. Ken and I have talked a little bit about he's kind of given me his vision of where he wants to go, and we were very much in alignment with the pace of play we want to play at, how hard you have to compete. Allowing players to make sure that they maximize their talents. Like he talked about, structure is a big part of it. I think being able to play with the puck as well as with the puck is a big part of being successful in today's game. You look at the two teams competing in the finals right now, sound defensive teams, but players that teams that allow their players to flourish with the puck. And those are all things that I see happening for this organization here. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm thankful for the opportunity, and well rested. I've been out for a couple of years. It's time to get going.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Ken and Dave. We're going to open it up to questions from the floor. So we're going to start up front here with Bob.
Hi, Dave. Bob Stauffer, Oilers Radio
Nice to see you,
Network.
Bob.
The Oilers staff currently has 2 former NHL head coaches and a guy that was in the Memorial Cup last year. Just a thought on, the current assistants and where you're at in terms of the makeup of your staff.
What I've talked to Ken about is I thought it was right that I talked to the coaches that are here first. So I haven't reached out to anybody about any other jobs. I know all 3 guys. I know Gulick, Signani, and Vibros. I've all had relationships with them in the past. So I want to talk to them first, see where they're at, and go through the process with them. But that's where it'll start. I haven't done anything about any other coaches. I felt it was fair to talk to those guys first.
Thank you. Mark, go ahead.
Hey, Mark Spector, Sportsnet.
Yeah.
Your teams always had good records versus Edmonton. Even when you were in Arizona and it didn't seem like you should, you beat this team fairly regularly. What are the things that allowed you to do that? And how will those elements be seen when you're coaching this team?
Well, I don't know why it ended up like that for a while. I don't know if it was a schedule or what it was, but there's a couple things I really believe in. One, no matter who you have on your team, the players, you try to maximize the individual talents of each of those players. And that's a coach's responsibility. Whether you have a top superstar or a role player or your backup goalie, you try to maximize every individual. And that's what I always feel like I try to bring to our teams. And with that, when you're maximizing that, you see what an individual can do, but then you try to put him in a position where he can really succeed. And that's where I feel like, especially some of the teams in Arizona where we weren't high on talent, we were high on character, higher on work ethic, but we worked together well. And we found ways to win a lot of hockey games. And that's the third thing I believe in. Like you got to find ways to win. There's days when maybe you're tired. There's days when maybe your top players are hurt. I always tell the players there's never an excuse for not winning, right? If you don't win, but give yourself the best chance to win you can. And that's what I've always believed in. I've got fortunate with a lot of wins. Sometimes when a lot of people would say, we shouldn't have won, but we did. And coming to a team where you have players like McDavid and Draisaitl, hopefully I can find ways to use those guys as weapons to win also.
Thanks. Terry?
Terry Jones, Edmonton Sun-Journal. Speaking of McDavid and Draisaitl, have you any preliminary idea of how you'd like to use them together, separate centers, that sort of thing? And the other thing is I suspect mostly because of what you were surrounded with, or had to use, particularly in Phoenix, you've kind of got this vision of being a defensive coach more than you are an offensive coach. But if I read right in what you were saying, you prefer to coach the team you've got and see where that takes you. Is that accurate?
It is. Well, first of all, with McDavid and Draisaitl, I know Connor from working with him in the World Cup with Todd, so I know Connor a little bit. I don't know Draisaitl personally. I've watched a lot of video of them together and apart. Some of it, I like seeing them together. It seems like they feed off each other, and I'll give you one example. When we were in the World Cup, we'd gone into the World Cup, we had 13 forwards. Matthews was our 13th forward. And going into the World Cup, we had put together some lines and trying different people with McDavid. And we tried McKinnon, we tried Drouin, there was a lot. And finally we came down one day and said, let's try Matthews up there. And I went to Austin, I said, you ever played any wing? And he goes, no, I'll do whatever I want, because he hadn't played pro yet. He hadn't played in the NHL. And so we weren't even sure if he was going to make the team. And so then Matthews comes up and he put him on the wing, and he was an unbelievable compliment. And if you guys remember those last couple of games of that tournament, it was phenomenal the way they worked together. I see Draisaitl a little bit in that same vein as Matthews, where real solid, great plays. Connor can give and go with him, and then basically Draisaitl shoots when he gets a chance. So that's something that sticks out in my mind. That being said, I'm not stuck on that. I want to see how the rest of the lineup, by the time we get to training camp, looks. But you watch those two players play together, they certainly feed off each other. As far as the defensive coach, I laugh at that all the time, because my first job in the NHL, I actually got from Doug Armstrong in Dallas because I was an offensive coach. I was the assistant coach in LA, and I ran the power play, and we had a real good power play. And Doug hired me because he thought I could work more creativity and more offense. And in Dallas, we had some good offensive teams. And then I went to Arizona, and we had to figure out how to win without those high-end scorers. So we figured out how to win in Arizona with character and grit. And good defense and good goaltending. So I don't look at myself as a defensive coach or an offensive coach. I look at myself as a coach that tries to find a way to win with the people that I have.
Over here, Min, go ahead.
Dave Mindariwal with CBC. I'm just wondering, with the fan base here in Edmonton, a lot's been made of how a lot of the fans have kind of turned away a bit from the team with all the changes that have happened in previous years with different coaches and GMs. What's your message to them as far as what you're hoping to bring to this team, and how you hope to change that, as well as you too, Ken? That same question.
I can just tell you that the excitement between Ken, what Ken brings, and what I've had for this job is, I think this is going to be a fun ride. And I would, if I'm a fan out there thinking I'm going to step away, you might be disappointed. I think that there's lots of upside in this team, and I'm excited to get going. Like, I feel that good about it here.
I would just say that, it's up to us, management, coaches, and the players to get the fans excited. If we play hard on an every night basis and win our share of games, and we're in a race for a playoff spot, the fans are going to be excited. It's up to us to make the fans excited.
Thank you. Jason, over here, go ahead.
Hi, Dave. Congratulations. Jason Greger, TSN 1260 and OilersNation.com. I got one for each of you. For you, Dave, just in Arizona, you never really had high-octane offensive guys, as you alluded to. What about moving from the back end? And in today's game, it seems if you can't move the puck up the ice, especially through the middle of the ice, you can't have success. So how do you coach that? Is it coaching? Is it the skill of your players? And then secondly, Ken, for you, do you see that same thing? And do you now build your team a lot with the input of what Dave wants as type of players?
I'll just start. You can't play in this league without a five-man attack, and it used to be, get one defenseman up in the play. You need to play as five-man units all the time. And you talk about, it's not just with the puck. If you watch forechecks now, you get in the offensive zone, it's hard to forecheck teams if you're just going to use three guys. Your D have got to be up on that too. So I'm a big believer. Defense have to be involved, have to be outlets coming out of your zone, breakouts. I mean, you need support. There's some teams that I won't mention them, but they do a real good job of breaking out of their own end, just with short passes, real good support of D partners, but then they get up the ice. So whether it be without the puck, a forecheck in the offensive zone, or getting up the ice, your D have to be involved. That's the only way you can stay competitive in the league today.
And I guess my answer would be, Dave and I are going to be a team. I worked with 4 coaches in Detroit, and you go to work every day and you grind away. And I think it's my job as the general manager to provide a vision, and then your pro scouts, your amateur scouts are going to go out. Pro scouts maybe on the short term, the amateur scouts are on the longer term, to build your team. Certainly in Detroit, in our heyday, you talked about, we had great defensemen. Now, to get those defensemen, for the most part, you got to draft them and you got to develop them. There are some good young defensemen in this organization coming through the system. Obviously, Bouchard, the 10th pick. Samorukov had a great year as a third-round pick in Guelph, leading them to the Memorial Cup, and there's some other young defensemen. So we got to draft it, we got to develop, and then as Dave and I work together on an everyday basis, we talk about all that. But certainly, I'm with Dave. You got to have the defense got to join the rush. They got to get the puck moved up, and you got to be moving in a 4- and 5-man attack. We're together on that.
Derek, go ahead up front.
Derek Van Diest, the Edmonton Sun, Edmonton Journal. Ken, this is for you. First off, there's been a lot of coaches that have come through here in the last 10 years. How important was it to bring someone in that'll provide stability to that position and is not kind of be a one-and-done guy? And then Dave, you must know the record of coaches here. There's been a lot of smart coaches that have come through here and haven't been able to make it work. What's going to be different, do you think, with you behind the bench that maybe some of the other guys weren't able to achieve?
Well, I think I'd like to think that your question for me, I tried to answer it when I was hired 3 weeks ago. I'm hoping to provide stability. I think the best chance for success is in a stable environment, and I think we all understand the pressures to win in all 31 markets, and unfortunately, they haven't had a lot of haven't been in the playoffs much. So it's our job to try to get the team, make it better, get into a playoff race. Our goal for 1920, like I said before, is to find a way to be in the race, compete, and ultimately we hope we're one of the last 16 teams standing when the season is over. So stability, a plan, and you gotta peck away. It's a move at a time, and I just think it's having a plan and having a stable environment. I'd like to think that that between my hiring and the hiring today with Dave, that I'm big on experience. I'm big, whether it's a player, whether it's a coach. Dave's got experience. You know, there's always rocky waters, there's choppy waters. You got to be steady on the rudder. And I think that now I hired a guy that had never coached before in the National Hockey League, in Jeff Blashill in Detroit. So I've gone that route too. I've gone both routes. I just thought coming here to Edmonton, that it was important ultimately to have somebody that's been behind a bench before and made decisions. And sometimes you make decisions as a young manager and as a young coach, and you'd say, boy, I don't know if I'd ever do that again. We've both done that. We've both made decisions, and we can reflect back on decisions that we've made that have worked out and that haven't worked out. So I thought it was important to have somebody behind the bench that's been through the wars of the National Hockey League, and so stability and experience.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I've coached two teams, one for 7 years and the other one for 8 years. And I'm big on stability. I'm big on relationships and communications. A coach should be, I mean, you got to kind of set the plan in place in your dressing room with your players. But ultimately, there's a bigger goal that the coaches, trainers, management, it's a team that's trying to win. You're trying to win together. I try to create that atmosphere where everybody is accountable, but they're not accountable to me or to management. They're accountable to winning, to the crest on your jersey. So that stability, that just like Ken says, just steady as she goes. We'll get this going the right way, and I feel very confident that we can do that.
Thank you.
Dave, Dustin Nielsen with TSN 1260. Ken talked about the steps he went through talking to a bunch of people about you. What about you on the other side of it? I'm sure you just don't sit there. Do you talk with people? Do you do some research into the organization? And what were they saying about this opportunity?
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people, and just it's been an interesting couple of years for me because I took a year off just to kind of catch my breath, and the Seattle thing came up, and it was very intriguing, interesting. But there was a couple opportunities that came up. The timing wasn't right for me to jump at, but this was a unique opportunity. And as I called around, it's a first-class organization. You have passionate fans. I think there's a ton of upside in this group here. With Ken coming along to give it stability, that was a big check mark for me. So there were just a lot of things that came together, and it's funny, like in the hockey world, this is still looked upon as a great place, and sometimes you get in a certain place and you think, oh, we haven't won in the last few years, but this is still looked upon as a very, very good franchise, and that's the feedback I got. And when Ken reached out, it was, I looked at it hard, and it was a great opportunity, and that's why I'm here.
Thanks. Jack, go ahead over here.
Dave, Jack Michaels, play-by-play for the Oilers. Just to follow up on that last comment, because by all accounts in Seattle, you basically had a chance to be the guy to your right, to be a Ken Holland, and to build everything piece by piece. Does it then go back to the old, I'm a coach at heart? Is that part of why you're here?
I was never going to Seattle to be a GM. Never. I never went to Seattle to be a GM or the coach. I was, funny, I've always been kind of a builder in my life. I built homes. Back when I played for the Hartford Whalers, I had a construction company in the summer that I ran, and buy and renovate houses in Connecticut. I've gone into the last 2 lockouts. I decided to build motorcycles. So I went to Seattle as it was intriguing. I got to help with the design of the buildings, the practice rink, all the team spaces in it. Got to help design a hockey operations department. So I was there, it was intriguing for me, those things. It was never intriguing. I never went with the intention of becoming a GM. I have no desire to be a GM. The coaching thing, at first we talked about it, and like I say, I didn't go to Seattle to coach, but when it got moved back, got pushed back from 20 to 21, that really took that would have been 4 years out. So that's, and it's funny, as I got away from the game, didn't skate much the first year I was out, played a lot more golf than skated. Last year, with the employees at Seattle, started skating a little bit, and started to watch the playoffs and the stretch runs here, and you just get that itch back. Like, you just want to be in the action. So I can't say enough good things about Seattle. That's going to be a phenomenal franchise. With ownership, Todd Lewicki's leadership, and the people they've got there, it's going to be a home run franchise. But I was blessed to be there and help out with some of the early infrastructure, but ultimately the coaching bug got me, and this opportunity was a great opportunity.
Thank you. Daniel, go ahead.
Daniel Nugent-Bowman, The Athletic. This is a question for Ken. You mentioned that Dave was one of your leading candidates. Why was that name so prominent at the start of your search, and were there any reservations with him being out of coaching for a couple of years for him to ultimately take the job?
Why was he a leading? You're asking me why was he my leading candidate? I would say to you, experience, the things that he's accomplished in his career in Dallas and in Arizona. He also played the game for a lot of years. Had a successful record as a player, and good checker, and played hard. Come to rink every day, and then obviously has been in the game a long time. Was I worried that he was out of the league for a couple of years? No, I wasn't worried that he was out of the league. I think in talking to Dave, he's obviously followed the league. He's been involved obviously in Seattle for the last years, so he's been talking to people about general manager candidates and putting together a franchise. So he's obviously followed the game. He's had a chance to get his batteries recharged, and I know he's excited to be back in the saddle. So I think. For me, he was a leading candidate because of his experience, because of what he's accomplished. I talked to some former players that I know real well, and some of them are assistant coaches in the NHL today and around the National Hockey League. They talked about his structure. They talked about his ability to communicate. They talked about his making players accountable. And those are all things that are very, very important to me as a general manager when I hire a coach.
Thanks. We've got time for a couple more. We'll go John at the back there.
Hey, Dave. John from Global. Ken just mentioned it again. Communication. How do you think you've evolved as a communicator with today's ever-changing athlete?
I don't think I've evolved. I think I've always had it. That's always been part of who I am. I believe in, I think one thing that players would tell you about me is I'm very honest. It's not a ruthless honest. I'm just honest in my opinion. If a player is not playing well, and I'll tell him he's not playing well. If he's playing well, I'll tell him he's playing well. There's a communication. I think it goes beyond communication. It goes to a relationship. You have a relationship with your players, that you care about them not just as players but as people, and you build a team atmosphere accordingly. And the communication is the easy part of it.
Thanks, Jason.
Dave, as a coach, you came in the early 2000s, and it's changed and evolved. Specifically, the uses of analytics. They're obviously a big part in today's game. They're a tool that can be used. Have you learned as a coach, is there some that you felt are more helpful from a coaching perspective?
When I retired in '94, I played for Philadelphia. I retired, and I was a player assistant coach in Houston. I started doing analytics in 1995, and it was all off video, and I have spreadsheets from back in the mid-90s. So I've been doing it a lot longer than you guys have been talking about it, and I use it as a tool all the time. We'll use it in our preparation. We'll use it in our analysis after. I think it's a great tool. It's not the only tool, but it's a great tool. And my video coaches, if you ever got any of their ears, you would see how much stuff comes out. And then I was working with a young guy named John Chaika, who is very much into it, and he had a lot of information. So the analytics part of it has been a part of who I am way before everybody. The one that I think the one you always go back to for me is scoring chances for and against. And it's not just, I have different rankings for scoring chances, how they happen, quality of them, and exactly who was involved in them, which is, you'd end up getting a real true plus minus. And I've collected this data for a long time, and it's really interesting to see. And I've made some decisions on them. There was a story I used to tell. We had a defenseman that was an old your typical old defenseman, hard, hack, whack, and just the greatest defender ever. And then we had this other young kid that came out of college who was a light guy, great skater, moved the puck, but he didn't have the aura of a defensive defenseman, so he didn't play those situations. And as I started going through these stats, one guy defends 75% of the time, and the other guy defends 25% of the time. The guy who's defending 75% of the time, he's going to get kabong sooner or later, right? So there's a lot of things like that that I've gone through for years and years, and it helps in to try what we talked about earlier, maximizing what a player can do, maximizing their talents. And numbers and stats sometimes can really lead you to some of those conclusions.
Okay, last question here. Terry, go ahead.
Dave, you've mentioned how you see a lot of upside in a lot of players here, but there's obviously another half of this hockey club that seriously underperformed last year. How do you view, say, your third and fourth lines as they sit now, and what confidence has Ken given you that there'll be significant changes to give you a better chance to win?
Ken and I have talked about this, and I think we both understand there needs to be some added depth in there. I'm big on having players that really fit roles down there, and we've talked about that, but I'll maybe let Ken talk about it a little more. But it's, we know that there has to be some scoring depth. There's some balance of scoring that if you look at the 2 fourth lines in the finals right now, they're both real good lines. They play against other teams' top players. They chip in goals when they're needed, and those are things that we'll strive for.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for your attendance today. We're going to get a quick photo op with Ken and Dave before we head into one-on-ones. Thanks again for tuning in, and thanks, Ken and Dave.
And there you have it. Dave Tippett announced as the 16th head coach in Oilers franchise history. I'm Tony Broad, Jack Michaels, as we are pleased to be joined by Oilers general manager and president of hockey operations, Ken Holland. Ken, thanks for your time.
Thanks. Nice to be with you.
Ken, you were hired 3 weeks ago to the date on May 7th. The number one word that you used in your press conference was stability. Now, I think the number one word used today in Dave Tippett's press conference was structure. How will Dave Tippett bring that to the Edmonton Oilers?
Well, I think the experience of being behind an NHL bench, I think he said he's coached 15 years behind a bench, so obviously he's got a process that starts day one at training camp, or probably in July and August as he's building his staff and going about the business of building a team that plays with structure. I think accountability is a big part of structure. When you set, the coach sets the parameters, and when they step outside the parameters, then you have to be held accountable. And he's obviously, I believe, that he's got real good communication skills. I talked to some players that played in his teams in Houston and in the National Hockey League, and they said that he was able to build relationships with his players. So I think those are important ingredients.
Ken, at your introductory press conference, you talked about the value of experience in one of the reasons you were hired.
Yes.
And in retrospect, should that have been as a bit of a clue that you were leaning in that direction for this hire, your first major one?
No, I mean, I'm big on experience, and I think that what is experience? Experience means you've been there, you've done that, you've made some decisions that have turned out or haven't turned out, whether you're a player or you're a coach or you're a general manager, and you can reflect back on that. And I think that where we are today, we've got a real good young base of players. We've obviously got to build around it. I think it was important. I thought it was important to have somebody behind the bench that had been there before. I had lots of conversations with Ken Hitchcock as we went through this search and this process. And Ken Hitchcock believed a lot of the things that I did, and I'm excited today to announce Dave Tippett as the next head coach of the Oilers. I think he's got experience, but he's hungry. He's been out of the game for a couple of years. He's fresh. He was in the World Cup. He did coach part of the team that coached those young stars. So I think it's a great time for Dave in his career.
Ken, 14 seasons behind the bench, 553 wins as an NHL head coach, a former Jack Adams Award winner. The list goes on with Dave Tippett. Now, in your conversations with him, you talked about the young nucleus you have here with the Oilers, spearheaded by McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. So how does his style fit into that mold?
Well, we obviously talked about that. We both like the team to play fast. You got to in the world that the game today, you got to play with speed. You got to compete. You got to compete when you've got the puck. You got to be heavy on the puck down low, and when you don't have the puck, you've got to compete hard. I think about the Detroit Red Wings teams that won the Cup in '97 and '98. People think about the offense, but at the end of the day, you got to win some games 2-1, and you got to win 1-0, and some nights you got to win 5-4. So you got to be able to check. And I think that in talking with Dave, like I said, we spent 4 or 5 hours together when I was in San Diego watching Bakersfield. We spent 4 or 5 hours together in Vancouver last week. We believe in the same things in building a hockey team, and got to have some pace, got to compete. You need some depth of scoring. The defense have got to join the rush, but you can't take chances. You can't just step up in the offensive zone and lead odd man rushes. So I think we believe in the same things. That's why we're here today, and I hired him as the head coach.
It's funny how quickly things can change. 5 or 6 weeks ago, I think you were on your way to the World Under-18s, and you said over there, I quickly recognized that I had the desire to do the job you're doing right now.
Yeah.
When you first talked to Dave, did you get that same feeling from him and recognize the same itch that you had realized you had, and that he wanted this challenge?
Yeah, very much so. He's excited to be back behind the bench. Coaching's his first love. He's enjoyed his time in Seattle, kind of helping build the foundation of Seattle, but ultimately he enjoys being behind the bench and the challenge of building a team, growing a team, making players better, and that certainly came out in our conversations. And like he said there, I know he's excited, like I am, to be involved with a Canadian team and a Canadian marketplace with a passionate fan base. So I know he's real excited about being back behind the bench again. I think that's important. He's got his batteries recharged and he's ready to rock and roll.
Jack talked about how quickly things can change. Now, in a conversation with Dave Tippett earlier, he talked about how when he was in Seattle, that you were one of the names on his list. Isn't it kind of funny how the roles have kind of reversed and you kind of sought him out this time around?
Yeah, it's funny how, without a doubt, it's funny how things go. So I'm excited. We're both excited about where we are at today. We're excited about the potential. We know that we've got a lot of work to do. We've talked about some ideas, and obviously I'm going to leave today. I'm going to go to the Combine, and I've talked to some general managers there. I'm going to start working the phones, and certainly the next 6 weeks are going to be critical in trying to make some decisions to build the team for the 1920 season. So we've got some big decisions to make. Certainly today for me to announce Dave Tippett as a coach, as the head coach, was a massive decision. I think as a general manager, that's probably your most important decision. I feel great about the decision. I feel great about the process. I feel great about working with Ken Hitchcock and going through the process over the last 3 weeks to come to today. Now that's tucked away. Dave can go to work on building his staff, and I can move on to the Combine, the draft, and work on the phones and see what we can do between now and mid-July in building a team.
Ken, you talked about how you feel great today. We're great that you joined us here and taking some time out on joining us on Oilers TV. Now we'll throw to a one-on-one interview with the man himself, head coach Dave Tippett. And here he is, the man of the hour, the 16th coach in Oilers history. Dave, thank you so much for taking some time out and joining us here.
My pleasure. Nice to be here.
Now, Dave, you've had a whirlwind of the last couple of days, and I'm sure that being from Saskatchewan played a big part in your decision to coming to Edmonton. But a two-word question for you, Dave. Why Edmonton?
Well, I think it's an unbelievable opportunity. When I started talking to Kenny a little over a week ago, we talked about what he wants to do here, and the more I listened, the more I got excited about the opportunity. And being from Western Canada, I've been around pro hockey for about 35 years. I've never worked for a Canadian team or played for a Canadian team, so it's just an unbelievable opportunity, and I'm just grateful to be here.
Well, a first experience for you for working for a Canadian market, that being the Edmonton Oilers. Now, 3 weeks to the day, Ken Holland was hired as the team's general manager and president of hockey operations. Maybe take us through that hiring process and when Ken maybe first reached out to you and how that all played out.
Well, it was an interesting process because, in actual fact, I was working for Seattle and I had Ken on the mind to bring to Seattle. So there's a real funny dynamic that works there. But I kind of was monitoring what was going on in the GM world just through my other job in Seattle. Ken's name was front and center with that, and when he took this job here, we kind of crossed him off the list, and then we crossed paths about another week later. So interesting, chain of events kind of thing. But I'm happy to be here working with him, and just really excited about the opportunity.
So the roles almost reversed there a little bit, didn't it?
A little bit, yeah. It was an interesting time, that's for sure.
Dave, maybe talk about your role with the Seattle franchise. They're slated to begin in 2021, 2022. Maybe take us through your role and what exactly did that entail?
It was a great opportunity. I'd taken a year away just to kind of catch my breath, and Tim Lewicki, who works for OVG, who's building the arena in Seattle, reached out to me and said, look, here's a project we're doing. We're going to hire his brother Todd, who's an unbelievable leader of NHL Seattle, come in and just give us a little hockey expertise. So went in, talked a lot about design of dressing rooms, a lot of things that as a coach or a player you don't get to do. It was very interesting stuff. So real grateful for my time in Seattle, but looking forward to this opportunity.
You talked about Ken Holland being on that list, and now you guys are here together in Edmonton. Maybe talk about your dynamic, maybe through the first few conversations you'd have with Ken, what you guys maybe expect and what you guys hope to instill here in the Oilers organization.
Well, I know one of the big things that he talked about was to bring some stability to the organization. It's been a little bit up and down here the last few years. He wants to make sure he brings some stability, and we talked about, my style of coaching coming in and structure, but I like to see players make plays. I want to see them play fast, and we kind of had that vision together of we want a very aggressive, fast team that can play with a real pace in today's game. So I'm excited about his vision of it, and as we talked more and more, it just felt like a good fit.
I read an article a few weeks ago, Dave, and it talked about how after a certain game in Dallas, Shane Doan talked about how there was a lineup of players just waiting for you just to maybe get a quick word in and see how the family's doing. How important is that relationship with your players, and how do you expect to maybe build on that in the Oilers organization now and for years to come?
I'm a big believer in relationships because it's a team. You have players on a team, you have coaches on the team, you have trainers on a team. Everybody should be working together, and you should care about each other. And I care about my players. I want them to care about winning. I want them to care about the crest on their jersey. And those things, when you work as a group together, players buy into that. They really feel like they're part of the process, and that's the way I want it to be. I want to make sure everybody feels like they're included. I feel like everybody's willing to give their best when they do that.
In your 14 years as an NHL head coach, my scouting report says that you also bring a certain defensive mindset. Is that something we can expect here in Edmonton?
It's funny because I look at what I have, and then you mold a team to think you can win with. And my first NHL job, when I was an assistant coach in LA and I got hired in Dallas, I was hired there because I was an offensive coach, because I ran the power play, and our power play had done real well in LA. And Doug Armstrong said, we like the offense, the creativity that you bring. So then I went to Arizona, and in Dallas I had some high-end teams that Modano and Arnott and Turgeon and players like that. I went to Arizona, we had strong defense, strong goaltending. The way we were going to win is to play real tight defense. And so when you go and you see what you have, you build a game plan that you think can be effective and ultimately make you win. That's what it's about. You got to try to win at all costs, and that's what we're trying to do here.
You talked about Mike Modano and Jason Arnott. Let's maybe talk about two players here in the Oilers organization, in Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. How much of a factor did they maybe play into your decision in coming to Edmonton, and how excited are you about the opportunity to coach two players like that?
Well, it's obviously an exciting opportunity. I've worked with Connor before at the World Cup with Todd McClellan a couple of years ago. Just a phenomenal young player. And Draisaitl played in Prince Albert a long time ago, my hometown, so I know a little bit about him. Don't know him personally, but the hardest thing to find in the NHL is those top players. If you're a team out there looking, and I know in Arizona we were looking for those top players all the time, but it's hard to find. And when you have a team that has a couple of them as kind of the backbone of the team, it certainly is enticing.
Now, they've made it very clear that their goal is to make the playoffs. The Oilers are looking to make the playoffs for the first time since 2017. You have 553 games of coaching experience. Dave, how do you get there?
Well, I believe you should try to make the playoffs every year, because it's what has happened in the league now. If you get in the playoffs, you should have a chance to win the Cup. And all of us, we can all say, okay, we want to win the Stanley Cup, but there's a process to get in there. And the first step of the process, you have to earn the right to be a playoff team. And that's what we're going to try to accomplish here. I think there's enough in this room, and I think Ken's vision of the roster moving forward in the summer, I think there's enough to really work hard to be a playoff team next year, and that'll be our goal.
And how do you manage those expectations of trying to make those playoffs and trying to just maybe stay tunnel vision?
Well, I don't know if it's, I think every team's goal is to make the playoffs next year. So every team has expectations like that. We're no different than anybody else. So you come in and you prepare. Like I say, I always talk about you earn the right to be a playoff team. And to earn that, you have to play well consistently through the regular season. And when you play well as a group, it's amazing the good things that can happen.
Dave, I appreciate your time. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much. Great
Dave
to be
Tippett is the 16th head coach in Edmonton Oilers history. Be sure to keep it locked in on EdmontonOilers.com for some draft combine coverage coming up this weekend. And that concludes today's press conference.